If everybody will go ahead and take your seat, we'll get started. Welcome, and we're so glad you're here, and particularly those of the public and other units that weren't a member of Charlie Company, thank you for coming. We have a postscript of a couple of items to mention to the memorial service. Many of us served in Charlie Company with Ronald Doc Stallings, and his name wasn't read, and that's an Army snafu. They were assigned to headquarters company and not to Charlie, but we all know it was a Charlie Company person. But we have an additional very, very special person, the mother of Lewis Wayne Fredericks, who was killed in action with Charlie Company. And where are you, ma'am? Oh, here we are, right here. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much. And we know you share all of our memories of that time. Those of us that didn't know her son, he obviously was very special. He received one of the very few Distinguished Service Crosses of members of our company. Paul, you have a few administrative things you want to say. While he's coming up, I'll mention Tom has his CDs. If anybody wants them in Joyce, they'll be here. And also, every time you see another logo on your canvas bag or the program or something, Joe had fun on his computer creating all those, and they're very unique and nice and everything. Paul?
Thanks, Doug. Good morning, and thanks to Bob and Wes for, and to Joe for a really moving memorial service and very, very fitting. Just a couple of quick things. Yesterday, I think Mac asked how many people were authors in the book, and about a third of the hands went up, which means about two-thirds of you guys, for whatever reasons, haven't told your story, and that's okay. That's fine. But I want you to know that we have an oral history program here where we interview veterans. And I've got a big stack of these questionnaires, and they'll be here today and down at the hotel. And they're the preliminary questionnaire that we use with any veteran prior to doing an oral history interview. And I want you to take it with you, think about filling it out, answering the questions that are in there as a way of starting to record your service and then send it back to us. It can be sent back electronically, it can be mailed back to us, whatever you want, and let us know whether or not you'd like to participate in the oral history program. We do these really, really well. We collect the biographical data, then we work out an agenda with the veteran of what kind of things we're going to talk about so that there are no surprises. We do video record the interview. We have it professionally transcribed. We send it to you for your approval. You get to go through and make pen and ink changes to anything that is said. And then we do a final transcript, and of course you get a copy of both the recorded, the DVD with the recording, and of the transcript, which is, I think it's important to us, and it would be a valuable thing for you to have. So just think about doing that. We also have, I mentioned those prints, like the one that we presented to Tom yesterday, and we have all those in one group, and we're going to take them down to the hotel because I think they're such a big awkward thing that it'd be easy to get them folded or wrinkled or something like that. So they'll be taken down to the hotel, and before you leave, probably at checkout, or if you want to pick one up this evening, you'll be able to do so and put it safely in your room. And the other thing is, one of our programs here is the historic vehicle collection. We have about a dozen historic vehicles from World War I through the present that are maintained by a volunteer force, and our 3/4-ton M37 with our Vietnam reenactors is out in front of the museum, and we'd love to have you go out there. And particularly Joe and Foxy, who I know spent plenty of time in a 3/4-ton, they'll probably go out there and tell us what we got wrong. But at any rate, please go out there. Half of our fleet is at the DuPage County Airfield today because they're doing a big World War II fundraiser for an organization called Honor Flight that you may or may not be familiar with. That flies World War II veterans to Washington for a day to see the National World War II Memorial. They, by the way, intend to extend that program as the World War II generation sort of fades from the scene. There are fewer and fewer of those guys who can actually make the trip. And Honor Flight hopes that they will continue that program, sort of following the actuary tables, frankly, to offer it to Korean War veterans to see the National Korean War Memorial, and Vietnam veterans to see the National Vietnam Memorial, the Wall. Okay, so those are the things that are on my mind. We're off to a great start. Doug, other issues?
Yeah, just a couple things.
Okay.
That's your pen.
Sorry.
That's all right. Now, we didn't say, now, all our authors that are here for our great special time of the panel, all their books are available as soon as we break and out there, and so many of us will be wanting to pick those up if we haven't gotten a chance to. We do have a few acknowledgments and presentations that Joe needs to make right now.
One thing, I don't know if you noticed out here, there's a table for the Midwest Shelter for homeless veterans. We of Post 556, of which Paul Herbert is the post commander, support them with our fundraising efforts. So please reach into your pocket and help that cause. It's a very worthwhile cause. I have some things to present. Dave. Dave? Step forward, please. Dave, for all your help and support throughout this whole effort, we sincerely appreciate it. JD, for all of your help, support, we sincerely appreciate it. Tom Mercer, please step forward. JD. Paul Herbert, please step forward. We of Charlie Company, Dogface Charlie, Swamp Rats, present to you a token of our appreciation.
Oh, thank you so much. Both of you guys, right on here. There you go. I know everybody wants to see this. This is what we call in the Army a grip and grin. Watch. Tom's got the floor. Okay.
This right here, Pat, you put the patch on there. Just not only because it's for looks. I cracked it right there. I said, hell no, we're real good right there.
See, this is why we do these things. This is how we get the real story on everything.
I worked 2 hours getting that thing just right. And I started, I heard something go, oh no. But you get a patch.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I love it. And I'll tell you what, and I appreciate the gesture so much, but I accept this on behalf of Dave and Bill and Andrew and Keith and JD, who was just here, and Eric, who's in the building but not. But we got a terrific staff. JD and I are the only veterans on the staff. But I can tell you, every one of the great people who work here and our volunteers and the people on JD are as passionate about this mission as anybody who ever served. And they soldier in that way as a tribute to you. And on their behalf, I'm proud to accept it. Yes, sir.
Okay, this very humble man wants staff first, but you're not done yet. We do have another gift for you,
Okay.
because Gene and I have pestered him over time, and we see him writing in a little journal all of his notes. So he sat down and he could recap all that we discussed pertaining to get this thing organized. So here's a very nice journal, a pen,
Yes.
and it's inscribed with a message from Charlie Company.
Well, I'll just pop it open here real quick. I'll be able to write every detail down. This is great. Thanks, Joe.
Oh, yeah, here, I'll show you. We'll do this just so you. So again, the graphics king decided to,
Oh, I see. See, I didn't go far enough. Oh, bless your heart. That's just so touching. It's Joe's wonderful artwork, and a wonderful note there. I don't know if I'll ever have the courage to use this for fear that I'll fill it up. I think I'll just prop it up on my desk there. But thank you so much. It's a wonderful, wonderful gift. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Yeah. Yeah. So, this morning's activity, and I'd certainly like to welcome all the members of the public who have joined us today. And as Doug said a few minutes ago, we're going to talk, we've got three distinguished author veterans of the war in Vietnam who are going to reflect a little bit with us on their experiences, and then we'll have a Q&A time that will allow all of us to engage them and learn from their experiences. The first is already seated here, Miss Joanne Kocher. Joanne graduated from the University of Michigan and then joined the American Red Cross as a volunteer. And she served in Korea and Vietnam from 1965 to 1967. And she was all over the Republic of Vietnam, but spent about 3 months of that time in 3 Corps Tactical Zone, and particularly with the 1st Infantry Division. When she came home, she returned to teaching, marriage, spent 20 years as a homemaker, then earned an MBA, became a business trainer, and has contributed to numerous interviews and written articles on veterans projects and in the documentary film, Our Vietnam Generation in 2011. She is the author of the book, Don't It Dolly. She spent 8 years compiling that book. She has established a network of the veterans of the American Red Cross volunteers. She can tell her story far better than I can, but these are women who were not paid a great deal, did not have any of the protections of the U.S. military, and from the photographs, as far as I can see, were allowed to wear a steel pot on dangerous occasions, but otherwise wore a smock and a dress as they boarded Huey helicopters and went out to fire bases to meet and greet our soldiers and give them some little touch of home. So she will be our first guest, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce all 3 of them, get all 3 of them seated at the table, and then we'll ask each in sequence to make a few preliminary remarks about their experience before we open it to questions and answers. But Joanne, thank you for your service and welcome. Our second guest is a distinguished 1st Infantry Division soldier, Brigadier General retired Jim Shelton is a native of Franklin, New Jersey. He currently lives in Florida. He entered the United States Army in October of 1957 and served until 1983, attaining the rank of Brigadier General. He has served all over the world, but with the 8th Infantry Division, with the Berlin Brigade, he commanded an ROTC, 4th U.S. Army ROTC region, has served in Korea and in Vietnam, but most especially as a division operations officer in October of 1967, an experience which caused him to come to us after he had retired the service, because he was compelled to write about the Battle of Ong Thon and the experiences of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry Regiment. That book is The Beast Was Out There, and it is cited. I actually think Jim probably deserves a Pulitzer Prize, but another outstanding historian, David Moranis, later wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book called They Marched into Sunlight, which covers the Battle of Ong Thon in 1967, and David based much of his account of the 1st Division's combat in that tragic fight on General Shelton's book. Sir, welcome to Cantini. Thank you for your service. I forgot to mention that he's a graduate, an Army ROTC graduate of the University of Delaware, and a veteran of the football team, the Fighting Blue Hens. Our third guest was introduced to the Charlie Company vets last night and gave just a wonderful talk. And he's a person that many of you will recognize because his books have been so widely published. Joseph L. Galloway is one of America's premier war and foreign correspondents, and has served for over half a century as a senior military correspondent for Knight Ridder newspapers. He is a native of Refugio, Texas, spent 22 years as a war correspondent and bureau chief for United Press International, and nearly 20 years as a senior editor and senior writer for U.S. News and World Report magazine. There is a long list of awards and accomplishments by Joe Galloway. I'm not going to read through all of them. It is a very, very, very distinguished career. I think all of us here recognize him as the co-author of one of the best books ever written on war, let alone written on the war in Vietnam, and that was co-authored with Lieutenant General retired Hal Moore. We Were Soldiers Once and Young, about the battles at the Ya Drang Valley by the 1st Cavalry Division in 1965. But even though, and then there was a sequel written just a few years ago called We Are Soldiers Still. Joe and General Moore have contributed tremendously to the understanding of the American people, of their Army and of their soldiers. And among his many, many, many distinguished awards, in 1998, he was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor by the United States Army, the only Valor Award issued by the Army to a civilian for his heroism in pulling two buddies off the battlefield into safety in the middle of that intense fighting. Joe, it is an honor to have you here. Thank you for your service. So, now my part's done. Let me just set a little bit in context. We have, and Joe also, he is known for that coverage of the fight at Ya Drang, but Joe covered he had 4 tours in Vietnam as a war correspondent, and is certainly familiar with and visited and reported on the operations in 3 Corps Tactical Zone and the operations of the 1st Infantry Division. So we have 3 very distinguished people here with very unique perspectives. A woman who served with the Red Cross, a soldier who served in the division headquarters as well as with one of the fighting battalions, and a war correspondent. I'll set just a little bit of context. The 1st Infantry Division that included Dogface Charlie was one of the two first divisions that we sent to Vietnam when we decided to intervene in a large way in that war in the spring of 1965. The other, of course, was the 1st Cavalry Division. The Marines were already at Da Nang. The 173rd Airborne was already in country. But for the most part, they were holding air bases and ports that would allow a larger entry of troops later on. In the important tradition of the 1st Infantry Division. The 1st Infantry Division was the first division we sent to France in 1917. It was the first division that we sent to Europe in 1942. And again in 1965, it was one of the two first divisions to go to the Republic of Vietnam. As all of you know better than I, we pursued a strategy called search and destroy. Historians have called it the Big Unit War from 1965 to 1967. The mission of the 1st Infantry Division was to find, engage, and destroy enemy units that were infiltrating from Cambodia, which was supposedly neutral, down along the general trace of Highway 13 or Thunder Road, through the Michelin rubber plantation and the Iron Triangle into Saigon, which was the capital of the Republic of Vietnam. The division's mission was to stop that, intercept them, destroy those units, and they did so for 2 years of very, very, very intense fighting. Two things happened in 1967. One is that General Westmoreland believed that that effort was having sufficient success that he could report to the President and the American people in the fall of 1967 that he thought we had reached the crossover point, the point at which enemy casualties exceeded their ability to infiltrate down through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that we saw supposedly light at the end of the tunnel. Interestingly enough, our enemies in North Vietnam had made the same decision. They knew from the effectiveness of American operations throughout the country that they could not sustain the long war strategy in the face of this effort that they had originally taken on. And so they decided what they had to do was win the war in one fell swoop, a big offensive all over the country that would trigger what they thought was a general uprising. To set that up, they attacked important bases and cities throughout Vietnam, but generally along the borderlands, along Cambodia and in the center part of the country. The purpose was to draw American forces there, making the more populated cities, the coastal areas, and particularly Saigon, vulnerable to their infiltration. And that resulted in one of the biggest fights, if not the biggest operation, that the 1st Infantry Division participated in. It precipitated 2 Medal of Honor actions, one at the Battle of Vong Phon in October 1967, and the heavy fighting around Loc Ninh, and the battles that are covered in the book that we released yesterday by Dogface Charlie. Those efforts were successful. Those operations, with a few exceptions, although particularly in the case of Vong Phon, American forces suffered heavily, those were successful operations that punished the VC and the NVA very hard. But they also succeeded from the enemy's point of view because they drew conventional forces to places like Con Thien and Khe Son and Loc Ninh, and the enemy was able to infiltrate into the population centers along the coast, and they were able to initiate what became known as the Tet Offensive. The Allied forces reacted powerfully to the Tet Offensive and essentially destroyed the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong never again during the war were as strong or as effective as they had been in the first part of the war because of the terrible casualties they suffered trying to take on American troops in the Tet Offensive. However, as all of us know, the Tet Offensive was such a shock to the country, to the President, to the armed forces. It undermined the credibility of our commander there, General Westmoreland. It resulted in President Johnson deciding not to seek a second term. It resulted in the replacement of General Westmoreland with General Abrams, a change in the strategy of the war in 1968, generally toward more pacification and stability operations as opposed to the large search and destroy operations, and 4 more years of that fighting, all of which was very well done at the tactical level, combined with the air campaigns against North Vietnam and the negotiations in Paris, eventually led to the withdrawal of American forces in 1973. And of course, the country was overrun by the NVA in 1975. The 1st Division was in the thick of all that, and I drag you through that simply to sort of set a context for the individual experiences that these people had. Joanne, we're going to start with you. And so what I would ask each of you to do is take a few minutes to tell us where and when you were in Vietnam and kind of outline your experiences and maybe make a few points of reflection. And in all cases, what we're doing when we get done with that, we want to have set a foundation for Q&A with our audience. So I'll ask you to go first, please.
Thank you, Colonel, for the opportunity to talk about my book, Donut Dolly. Who here, I asked this the other day when just veterans were here, who here has heard of a donut dolly? Oh, well. How many have actually seen one? Almost the same.
I can see one now.
I don't need to go any further on that. The Red Cross girls were in Vietnam to remind the men of home, a sister or the girl next door. In World War II, the Red Cross sent young women to England. They passed out donuts to the GIs. The soldiers called them donut dollies. In Korea, we had games and stories and donuts. In Vietnam, we had games and stories, but it was so primitive, we usually just walked around and talked to everybody. We didn't have donuts because, in the words of one mess sergeant, it was too damn hot. Nonetheless, we upheld the proud duties of the program. General William C. Westmoreland, Army Chief of Staff, invited the Red Cross girls to be the first women officially allowed in a combat zone. We went wherever commanders invited us. Often commanders asked us to take risks because they felt our visits meant so much to their men. We crouched in bunkers and ducked alongside the soldiers. I was just inches from being killed 5 times. You have to be a little crazy to do what I did. Wow. These were gifts of thank you for coming to see me from so many people. 35 years after the war, my husband convinced me that it was time to write the whole story. There are so many misconceptions about Vietnam. It was time to write my book. It turned out to be not so much a labor of love, but a labor of duty. In writing my thoughts for this speech, I went over 8 years of research and notes I had for my book. Of course, I wanted to establish my association with the Big Red One. In Vietnam in 1966, in a year so far back, we didn't have computers. I served a good portion of one of my 4 duty stations at the 1st Division. I sensed that to a man, they had a pride that said, when the others can't do it, give the job to us. Get out of the way. We'll get it done. Names like Phelps, Hargis, Carter, Brzezinski, who is here. Stand up. Brzezinski. Grzywinski, okay, in English. He's a historian for the 1st Division Association, and he had the rosters and he found the names, and it was unbelievable how much fun it was meeting everybody on emails. We spent an entire weekend emailing back and forth. I think I know who was that was. I think I do too. So-and-so will know for sure. And we put all of us, we copied everybody on all our emails, and it took us a whole weekend to get through the whole thing. It was more fun than I've had in a long time. After all these years, their heroism was frozen in time to me. And again, I became astonished at their patriotism. It seemed wherever I went, I'd hear about the big red one. And for a time, it was my division. Your reputation had apparently, you guys got around. Along with the 1st Division, I served in units from the southernmost part of Vietnam, the Delta, all the way to the northernmost Central Highlands. One of the misconceptions I wanted to correct in my book, for example, was I think most of the reading public is convinced that all those who served in Vietnam were killed. I've had people tell me that I was crazy because that's what it was, and if I disagreed, I was wrong. The percentage is, does anybody know? The percentage of those who served in Vietnam who were killed. It is actually 2%. That is the same as World War II and Korea. And I've been told I'm a darn liar. But those are Department of Army statistics. I wanted to show what it was really like in Vietnam during the war. I wrote what I saw and what I did, expanding on a diary I kept. The book is a time capsule. It is peer-reviewed and published by the University of North Texas Press. It's the only book of its kind. It is true to war. It doesn't rely on daintiness or feminism. War recognizes neither. I also briefly cover the year I spent as a donut dolly in Korea. Stale sea rations in a foxhole, on alert all night because of a sniper's bullet, military rules that don't go anywhere and mean much, but also friendships that will last a lifetime, brotherhoods that future spouses couldn't understand, bravery that young men were shocked to find they had. Not only are these the themes of my book, but part of the lives of the soldiers, and my life, as one who did my best to make their hell and boredom easier. I was part of them. I was a civilian, never allowed to carry a weapon of any kind, but I was accepted as a soldier. Men understand frustration and adventure. Women relate to the dangers and their vulnerability. Their vulnerability in spite of being surrounded by thousands of soldiers. We had to harden ourselves. Yet we knew we had to maintain an arm's length femininity, or we had no purpose. We were not just recreation workers, we were proud donut dollies. That made us the voice of home in a blue dress, giving a blood-spattered corporal a cup of coffee. Our combat boots were caked with mud, and our nylons should have been thrown away 3 weeks ago. Our sweat-stained uniform cried to be washed. We weren't as dirty as the soldiers were, but we did the best we could. I have a website where you can read a story, donutdolly.vpweb.com. You can pick up a card at the table. In my notes, I discovered that some of my best stories and memories are from my time with the 1st Division. Names of many 1st Division veterans are in my book, thanks to Grzywinski. I know how to spell it, but I don't know how to say it. As many of you well know, most of the time, I didn't know where I was or who I was visiting. I only learned names and units and places years later, when someone emailed me and told me he once saw a donut dolly, and we both realized at the same time that it was me. Or it wasn't me, but we missed each other by that much. Or I opened an email and discovered it was from someone I used to know. I have an idea some of you have had that experience. Maybe an old friend contacted you. In this computer age, it's not that difficult. I think Doug Goddard beat people over the head quite a bit doing that. And your mind flashed back to a mean, skin-headed soldier with a pack of Pall Mall cigarettes stuck in his helmet band. But what does he look like now? What experiences has he gone through? Even so, we shared the common experiences of war branded deeply within us. 40 years hasn't passed. We just stopped smoking. I want to thank so many for their help. When I needed a fact or a piece of information for my book, I would send an email to anyone who might know. They would send the question to their friends. Before long, up would pop an answer from someone from 6 degrees of separation. Someone who knew, and he would tell me. And he would tell me also how much he appreciated the donut dollies. And then the people up and down the chain would send me jokes and pictures of flowers and rocks and little kids and puppies and kittens and bugs. And they would tell me their memories of a donut dolly and how much they appreciated seeing her, just seeing her far from home over 40 years ago. It's an honor being part of your memories. A man came up to me the other day and he touched me and he said, I saw a donut dolly a long ways away and now I have touched one. These are the people who were called baby killers and were spit upon. This is why I wrote the book. I wanted people to know this about you veterans. I have over 700 people in my email address book. As the Red Cross emphasized in our training, they don't love me. They love their home, their family, and their country. That's what they saw when they saw me. These are the people who verified my stories and told me I was right when I thought I must be wrong. In my book, I tell about what happened when my parents sent 2 live Christmas trees to me in Vietnam, and what the men thought and how they acted. I tell about what it was like to watch a football game on TV. To my surprise, it was my school, the University of Michigan. I was so excited, I didn't catch the name of their opponent. On another day, I was talking to a group of men about the day's events. I heard a crack, crack a few inches from my head. We all hit the dirt. A sniper had targeted my blue uniform, and I happened to be inside it. To us who served, memories of the war are still fresh. Time has frayed us. If we have hair, most of it is gray. We haven't been able to fit into our uniforms without a lot of help. But when we get together to remember the good times, we're teenage soldiers. In our hearts, we are forever young.
Thank you, Joanne. General Shelton?
Thank you. First, I want to answer a couple of questions, John. What's a fighting blue hen? Some of you guys heard that. And it has to do with the military. When I was recruited to be a football player at the University of Delaware, the line coach came to me and said, "How would you like to be a fighting blue hen?" I said, "A what?" He said, I learned after I got to University of Delaware that and when I took a course in Delaware history, because I had to, it was a mandatory course, and found out that the Fighting Blue Hens were actually the first regiment to join the Continental Army, which was the regiment from Delaware. And they carried with them, wherever they went, fighting cocks. And these fighting cocks had blue sheened feathers. And they never lost, okay? So the University of Delaware athletic teams all call themselves Fighting Blue Hens as a result of the Revolutionary Regiment. And I'm still proud of that. Proud to have been a blue hen. The part about why did I write a book? Well, as maybe some of you know, I went into, I don't want to go around to my history. I just want to say that, you know, I was ready to go to Vietnam. I'd been in Berlin, and I volunteered in 1965, I guess it was, and I never got to Vietnam until '67. But I finally got there, and they asked me what kind of job I wanted. I said, I want to go to a battalion. So there's only 2 majors in a battalion. That was a S3 and a XO. And I got the job as the S3 of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry. And I had replaced a guy by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Terry De La Mesa Allen, Jr., who was the son of Terry Allen, Sr., who commanded the Big Red Run, one all the way across North Africa and Sicily. Then he went back and took over another division, the 104th, help me, John, Timberwolves, and did a great job. He was a very famous general. I knew his history before I ever met his son, because two generals along my way in the Army had told me about General Terry Allen. They said he was without a doubt the best division commander the Army ever had. And that was, the first one that told me that was General Don Clayman, who was a regimental commander in the 9th Infantry Division in Sicily. And the second one that told me that was none other than Brigadier General John Corley, who was perhaps the most decorated soldier in World War II. He had 2 Distinguished Service Crosses and 8 Silver Stars. He also commanded a regiment in Korea. And he was the head of the Ranger Department at Fort Benning when I went through there. And I went up to him and asked him who he thought was the best. And he told me, Terry Allen, without a doubt, because he commanded, Corley had commanded underneath Terry Allen for a long time. And he was on Omaha Beach commanding the 16th Infantry on Omaha Beach, Corley. Anyway, if I don't watch out, I'll be really off the subject here. Why did I write a book? Well, when I got home from Vietnam, my mother and father were still living up in New Jersey. I went home on leave, and one of the first things my dad gave me was a clipping out of the paper of the Battle of Vang Khan that he had cut out of the, I think the Herald Tribune or the World Telegram and Sun from New York. My dad was a Brooklyn guy, and he read all the New York papers. And gave me a clipping out of the newspaper, and I read it. And I said, wow, these guys got it all screwed up. They calling it a victory, the Battle of Vang Khan. There wasn't no victory. It was a bad scene. And I'd been the S3 of that battalion from July until October, and I got pulled out of the battalion in October to go to work at division headquarters. And my book is not about my work at division headquarters. You know, it's a different deal. My book is about the Black Lions and when I was in it in the battalion. So I knew a lot of people in that battalion, and they were my friends. And I think every man that I knew at the time was killed in that battle, including Terry Allen, the commander, Command Sergeant Major Francis Dowling. He was our great Sergeant Major. He was about 6'6", and they found him hugging General Terry Allen, or Colonel Terry Allen, when they found both of them dead. Both of my RTOs were killed. Every man that I knew was killed. And I was up at division headquarters listening to it all on the radio. And yeah, I want you to feel sorry for me, because it's never been the same. I'm a different man today because of that day. When I got a call the next day and they said, we want you to come down and identify the bodies, because we can't identify a lot of them. And they were mutilated. And there were men who were on stretchers that the VC shot them right through the stretcher while they were laying on it, you know. And I remember looking down at Don Hollader, who was the great West Point and All-American end for 2 years. And when his senior year, me as a fighting blue hen went up there and tackled him about 20 times in a scrimmage at Army, West Point, when I was a senior in college. And he was the Brigade 3. And he went running into that fray that day to try to save wounded Black Lions, my guys. He was a brigade operations officer, and he was a great man for going in there, because I know that he knew he was going into sudden death, and he went in anyway. And I just saw a clipping in the latest Sports Illustrated where he was awarded a Distinguished Service Cross instead of a Silver Star for what he did that day. And last week I was at Arlington Cemetery when it was presented to him at his gravesite, and presented to his 3 little girls, who are now married, but they were just little girls when he was killed. And that was part of that battle. That was part of that victory that the newspaper said happened that day. And I said, I got to write a book to talk about, as far as I could determine, what the hell really happened, as opposed to some kind of victory, you know. And so I started writing my book on, I was retired. I didn't even try to do it when I was still on active duty, but when I retired, I got me a bunch of yellow line pads and started writing about everything I could remember about being with the Black Lions. And I got a little thing here written, which I've given probably 100 times at different places, at veterans. About every time I go to talk, I end up reading this paper, because it's, well, I wrote it, and bear with me and I read some words here. During my career, I served in 9 divisions. The name of this is A Great Soldier by James E. Shelton. During my career, I served in 9 divisions, but none was the same as the Big Red One. The patch that we wore on our shoulders pulled us all together, from the men who fought at Cantini, who first wore the patch and gave us our name, Black Lions, to the men who fought at Kasserine and El Guitar and Sicily and Omaha Beach and Aachen and the Hurtgen Forest and Siegfried Line and on to Czechoslovakia, those men who made America stand up and praise the Big Red One. And to those who served on the frontier of freedom after those World War II men earned us the honor to be called the Big Red One, and then to those who served and bled in Vietnam and in Desert Storm and Bosnia and Kosovo, and most recently in Iraq and Afghanistan. We were bonded together by the Big Red One patch. It is a patch of sacrifice. No mission too difficult, no sacrifice too great. Duty first. We must remember why those sacrifices were made. I want to tell you now the most meaningful event of my life. In 1972 and 73, I was a lieutenant colonel, battalion commander in the 82nd Airborne Division. I had been in Vietnam in 1967 as a major. In 72 and 73, the U.S. Army was a shambles. The Vietnam War was just ended. Young men were leaving the Army disgusted. Morale was at an all-time low. Do you remember the expression FTA? It was everywhere. General Westmoreland was the Chief of Staff, head of the Army. He sent out a message to all Army posts stating that he wanted senior officers who were in command to go to the separation centers each week and give a little talk to these men leaving the service. At Fort Bragg, about 150 to 200 men per week were leaving. It certainly sounded like a good idea. However, think about this a moment. Here I am, a big shot representing the establishment, walking into a group of demoralized, disgusted soldiers who would be out of the Army that day. Picture yourself walking into a big room with men sprawled around waiting to get a speech from a lieutenant colonel. They booed and hissed me. I felt like a prison warden. Anyway, you get the picture. I didn't like it. I had prepared a small thank you speech, but I knew it would mean nothing to them. What could I do? What could I tell them that would mean something? And then I thought of my greatest hero, a draftee soldier like them, Ray Neal Gribble of Muncie, Indiana. I held both of my hands up to get them to quiet down. After some slurred remarks and grumbling, they quieted down a bit, and I told them this. I want to tell you a story about a soldier draftee like you, Spec 4 Ray Neal Gribble, a hero, my greatest hero, a 24-year-old draftee. Surprisingly, they began to listen. When I first met him, he had been in Vietnam for 6 months. He was a seasoned soldier, and he was doing the job of a squad leader. Normally, that job would be done by a sergeant first class with 10 to 12 years of service in the Army. Gribble was 24, older than most, and married. He was probably the best squad leader in Company A, 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry Black Lions, the 1st Infantry Division, Big Red One. It was obvious that Gribble was an excellent leader. His men always had clean weapons and ate their sea rations. It was a miserable existence, but he took care of his men. He walked in the valley of shadow of death daily. After observing his behavior for about a month, I decided I wanted to make him my radio operator. It made sense for many reasons. He had already served many months in prime danger. It wouldn't be as dangerous with me at the battalion CP, and he was a sharp guy. We need RTOs who can make quick estimates and relay them on. Anyone can tell you that RTOs were critical in field operations. I approached Captain Jim George, the Alpha Company commander. He did not want to lose Gribble. But after talking to him about the need, he agreed that Gribble should take the job. It only took hours for Gribble to catch on to the RTO job. He knew what was happening around us, and he was able to give timely and accurate reports. In a few short days, he was doing the job like a pro. Then, about 10 days after working on that job, he came to me and said, "Sir, I have to go back to my squad." I was astonished. He had been doing a great job, and I needed him. I said, "What are you talking about? The battalion needs you here." Tears came to his eyes. I was looking up at him because he was about 6'3". He said to me, "Major, my men need me. I visited them today, and they pleaded with me to come back to my squad. I got to go back." I didn't know what to say. I needed him, but I could see in his eyes that he really meant it. So I said, okay, go back to your squad. Shake my hand. I'm proud of you." He left immediately. I never saw him again. Shortly thereafter, I was pulled from the battalion in the division headquarters. Within 2 weeks, the battalion fought a big battle, Angthon. Alpha Company was in the lead. Ray Gribble's squad was in the point. Ray Gribble was killed with his men. He gave his life for his men. Now in this room at Fort Bragg, go back, you could hear a pin drop. I looked around the room, and it was utterly still and silent. Then I said, "That's why I'm here today. It's to thank Ray Neal Gribble for his service to his country. And since Ray can't be here today, I ask you, all of you, to accept my and my country's thanks for your service and your sacrifice. Ray Neal Gribble was a hero to his men, to his country, and to me. And I knew to all those men that I spoke to that day. Ray Neal Gribble and other men like him did not want to die at age 24 in the middle of a hostile jungle. But at a critical point in time, he made a decision to place himself in harm's way on behalf of his fellow man. It was a very conscious decision with an understanding of the possible consequences. He did it. He assured that a purpose was given to his life. His selfless act is an uplifting example to his fellow man. He fulfilled the purpose of his existence, which was to use his life to inspire the lives of others in the best interests of mankind. His actions added to the nobility of mankind. His act made him immortal. As we look forward to our own eventual demise, will we be able to say the same? God bless all those great men and all those that follow them in our great causes of the future. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Joe Galloway.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Before I really crank up here, there are a couple of black Stetsons sitting in the back of this hall, and those are two of my brothers in arms from the Yadrang Valley. Ed, Roger, would you stand and be recognized, please? thank you for welcoming a couple of first Cav guys in a room full of big red ones. It's a great pleasure to be here. The book, I don't have to say a whole lot about it. I can tell you that it was a dream that Hal Moore, who was a battalion commander in the fight, a lieutenant colonel, the day the fight ended for us in landing zone X-ray, we stood and looked at each other, tears running down our face, and made a promise that we were going to write this story one day. What I knew as a correspondent for United Press International is that they would probably allow me as many as 11 or 1,200 words to tell this story. And that's clearly not enough. But that was the way the wire service was. The watchword was, the second coming of Christ is worth 2,000 words if you can get a picture. Everything else is scaled proportionately. So I knew I wasn't going to get to clear my throat with the details of all that I had seen in those 2 days and 2 nights in X-ray, and would see the results of the ambush in landing zone Albany a day later. 234 young Americans killed in 4 days. That's a terrible toll. In fact, between that and a couple of other fights before and after that, 305 total killed in 3 weeks in November in that valley. It's a terrible butcher bill. And I don't think any man who was there could characterize either of those battles as a victory. If you survived, it was a victory, a personal victory. But there was too many lost in that place. I saw things that I never saw again on a battlefield. I saw men willingly give up their lives to save that of a man on their right or a man on their left. I saw lieutenants go out into certain death to pick up one of their fallen troops who was calling for help, calling for a medic. We lost almost all our lieutenants, most of our medics, our NCOs paid a heavy toll, and of course there was a battalion, the 1st of the 7th Cavalry, 65% draftees, fought like tigers, most of them with less than 3 or 4 weeks left on their 2-year service to their country. We sent young boys home in Army coffins who should have been on the Freedom Bird on their way home. Their enlistment done, and they didn't make it. And those things stay with you as a comrade in arms, as a brother in arms, as someone who was there to be a witness. You can't just be a witness. In that time, in that place, amongst such men. The general and I, the colonel and I, promised we would write this book. He had a career in the Army. I had just come overseas the first year of what would be nearly 17 years as a foreign correspondent, everywhere from Vietnam, 4 tours, to Japan, to Indonesia, to India, and a final tour of 3 years in the old Soviet Union in Moscow as the UPI bureau chief. And finally, I came home in 1980. And the general had retired with 3 stars a couple of years before I came home. And watching a movie precipitated my contacting him and asking him, "Sir, are you ready to go to work on this book?" It was 1982. And he said, "I sure am, Joe." I said, "I'll be at your house tomorrow." And I got on a plane in LA and I flew to Denver and caught another plane to Gunnison, Colorado, and Hal picked me up at the airport and we sat down that January 1982, winter, snow up to your ears in Colorado. And we talked about what we wanted in this book. And he said, "Joe," he said, I want to go back to the battlefield. I want to walk it. I want to talk to my men." "That's what I want to do," he said. I said, "Sir, they won't even let us in the country. How do you reckon they're going to let us go into the old battlefield over on the Cambodian border when they're fighting the Khmer Rouge now?" He said, "I don't care, Joe. That's what I want to do." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Sir, I see a chapter in that book about what the death of one soldier in battle does to the lives of those who sent that soldier there. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, wives, children." And General Moore said, "That's a great idea, Joe, but you're going to have to do it. I can't." That chapter is in the book. I can't tell you how many times it broke my heart. I asked those families to tell their story, and I would open a letter, and there it would be. There it would be. The chapter in the book, "We Were Soldiers Once and Young," is titled "The Secretary of the Army Regrets." And I wrote it, and I can't bear to read it this day. So those were the 2 things we wanted to get done, that we wanted in that book, and eventually succeeded. Thank you. We succeeded. We got it done. We got the book written. But on that day, I looked at Hal Moore and I said, "Sir, if we were finished with this book today and the manuscript was sitting here on this table between us, I'm not sure I could find any publisher in America who would print it. The American readership, if you will, is very divided on our war, and a lot of people hate it. And they hate the soldiers who fought it. And I said, we may do all of this work and no one will publish it, that there would be only one copy for your shelves and one for mine. Do you still want to do it, General? And he looked at me and he said, well, of course, Joe. We have an obligation to the troops. We have an obligation to tell their story, to tell the truth, get it done. And thus we began 10 years of research, over 200 interviews, pulling it together, and I think we did a pretty good job.
So it's not every day you get to talk to people like this. Who's got the first question? And raise your hand because we have the hand mics and we want to hand you a mic to talk to. Mac?
Thank you, Paul. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Patrick McLaughlin, and these guys know me as Mac. And I served with Dogface Charlie during a part of the time that Paul Herbert spoke about, and that was the fight at Loch Nen in October and November of 1967, and a lot of these warriors here in this room were there with me. I have a question for, my first question anyway, is for General Shelton. I've read your book, The Beast Was Out There, and it's a remarkable piece, sir, and I thank you for writing it. And I note that in your work, actually, I didn't know this, and many of the guys here probably didn't either, but we were in that vicinity from October 6 to 13, probably just a couple of miles from where the Black Lions had that fight on October 17th. And so we had just operated in that area, and then 12 days later, we were fighting at Loch Nen. But one of the interesting things in your book, and it's what I want to ask you about, and you made the comment on page 211 when you wrote about General Cavazos, then Lieutenant Colonel Cavazos, who was Dogface 6, who was our commander at that time. And in talking about General Cavazos, you said his Dogface Battalion was the most highly acclaimed infantry battalion in the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. And then you go on to talk about what Colonel, well, he's a General Cavazos to me, so what the general, what Dogface 6 would have done, and would that have made any difference on October 17th had he been in command? And I wonder if you might talk about that, and if you would, sir, also talk about your experience with the division in that October-November period when we were fighting at Loch Nen.
Yeah, I remember the first guys that sniffed out that the enemy was up in that area, the Long Nguyen secret zone, which frankly had never been penetrated. And the first unit that really penetrated it was the 1st of the 18th from the southern boundary, from the Bin Dung boundary. And they went up in there with Colonel Cavazos. I remember it well. I was working in G3 and keeping close track of the radio. And Thanks, Joe. I never was good at comma. What a damn thing. And Dogface got in a real scrap up there, but what happened was General Cavazos was using scout dogs. And he was getting signals that scout dogs were sniffing something out in front of him. And so he decided to kind of slow down a little bit, not be slipping in there. And I guess the VC thought that most of the battalion was in there when they weren't, and they opened up. In other words, they just unloaded on the area that Dogface was moving, but Dogface wasn't moving. He pulled him back. And he said it was like a big firefight, but the only thing is the only guys that were shooting were the VC, and we didn't get into it. And then he pulled back and, you know, snuggled up into an NDP and waited for the buggers to attack, which they did. But, and I remember it very vividly that night. There was a night when a dog-faced soldier was badly wounded, and the dog-face called for a dust-off. It was after dark. And General Cavazos was on the radio with me. And he said, "We got to get help in here. The guy's dying," or something like that. You know, words to that effect. And I rogered him, and we ordered a dust-off. Well, the dust-off went in there. As a matter of fact, about 3 guys reacted to that call. One was the official dust-off, and another one was one of the guys from one of the air mobile companies from Corps that was around, and he says, I'm going up, you know. And he went up like an unofficial dust-off. He was just an aviator that said he heard what Colonel Cavazos said about the problem. The only problem is the weather was like it is now, overcast and rainy. And the 2 dust-offs were coming in there, and Colonel Cavazos called and said, "Don't come in. Do not come in. The weather is too bad." And the dust-off said, "I'm coming in." And unfortunately, the dust-off crashed, and everybody in the aircraft were killed. And the young man, I don't know what happened to him. I hope it wasn't any one of you, but it was a tragedy. Another dust-off tried to get in, the other one and he couldn't get in. And I remember that night very vividly. Now that was about 10 days before Dauntless got into their scrap. Because what happened was Dauntless flew out west of where you guys were. I wish I could remember the name of that place, but it had been given a name. Dauntless went out to the west, almost out to Cambodia, and put in a blocking position over there, because they figured that the outfit that Dogface was fighting were heading for the Cambodian border. So Dauntless went in on the west. And then after fooling around over there for a couple days and finding nothing really, they decided to move north and east. So Dauntless walked, the second time they walked. And they had fights all the way up to where they went and set up an NDP. And then the next night they moved again. And by this time, that was a weary battalion because they'd been in there. They had scrounged around with not much contact. Then they broke down their NDP there and moved up, spent one night in another NDP, broke that down and moved further over. And you know, you do that and you guys are dead dogs, you know. So then the next day, 2 companies, which was Delta and Bravo Company, got into a fight, a big fight. and Welch was the Delta Company commander, and Bravo Company was Jim Kasich. I might add that after, I'll get back to where they were, but I might add that Jim Kasich was the guy who I interviewed after this battle, and I said, what were you thinking that morning when they gave the attack order? And Kasich, Jim Kasich, the Bravo Company commander, said to me, sir, he said, we knew the beast was out there, and the beast was hungry. That's what Jim Guest said. And that's where I got the name of the book. And actually, the guy from here, that guy that helped me edit my book, I called it The Battle of Ong Thong, and he said, how about calling it The Beast Was Out There? And I said, that's a damn good idea. So that's how we changed the name. But now, we didn't see too much of Dogface at that time. They were not involved in that fray. But you see, Dogface was what I call the benchmark for the division. And that was because Cavazos was commanding it. I mean, he was a great commander. He was a great tactical commander. He was no big strategic guy. You know, he might have been, he's 4 stars today, he's still not a strategic guy. He's a tactician. He exudes a animal kind of way of knowing what's going on. And that was my impression of him from knowing him. And later, he was even more like that when he came up to G3 and worked with me, and he was like, I said he was like Genghis Khan behind the desk, you know. He didn't want to be there either. And anyway, let me see how the hell I answered your question.
Thanks, sir. And we're going to go on to the next question. But that was a great tribute to a man I know all these veterans respect a great deal.
Okay.
Next question.
It's clear. Okay, good.
This question is for Mr. Galloway. I met you earlier, thank you. And I'm the wife of Bob Norris, another veteran in here. The movie, your movie, could you talk a little bit about what that was like, taking your book and having it made into a movie, and what that experience was like for you?
Well, the first question people always ask is, how much control did you have? And the answer is not a damn bit. You know, I compare it to, you know, you're giving up your baby for adoption. You try to pick as good a parent as you can find, but when you sign that contract and take that check, it's not your baby anymore, it's theirs. And when we hit the bestseller list, we were besieged by people from Hollywood. And I observed that they come in 2 sorts. Those who have money but no ideas, and those who have ideas but no money. And so we stood about a year's worth of our time being wasted on the telephone, and finally said the hell with it, and we fired our Hollywood agent and withdrew the property from consideration and wouldn't answer their phone calls. And the general and I were up at VMI, and we had done a lecture, and we were back in quarters and about to wrap ourselves around some good Scotch whiskey when the phone rang, and I picked it up, and a fella said, Mr. Galloway, you don't know me, but my name is Wallace, and I'm a screenwriter, and I read your book, and I want to make that story into a movie. And I said, Mr. Wallace, you're right, I don't know you. And you have about 30 seconds to answer me one question before I hang up on your ass. And he was a little startled, and he said, what's your question? And I said, do you believe in heroes? He said, I do. Really, I do. I just finished making a movie with Mel Gibson called Braveheart that'll be out next summer. And you see that movie, you'll know what I believe in. I said, good enough. We'll talk some more, Mr. Wallace. Give me your phone number. And so that was our intro and our beginning on what took 8 years from that conversation to the first premiere showing of the movie. We worked with Randall Wallace for 4 years on the screenplay. He didn't know diddly squat about the military. He knew that this was an important story, and he was deathly afraid of screwing it up. And so he invited us to vet his screenplay writing and correct it, and boy, did we. His first version, I remember, had the lieutenant colonel battalion commander coming up to the 2-star general division commander's quarters at Fort Benning on a Sunday morning early, hammering on the door. And when the general arrived at the door in his chenille bathrobe, he pokes him in the chest and says, sir, I got a bone to pick with you. And we said, no, this is not quite how it's done in our Army, and never has been. So we worked closely and hard. And, you know, in the end, 75% reality based on the book, and 25% Hollywood BS. And that's the reverse of normal for those guys. And we are told that we should be happy with that. The only problem is that General Moore and I are 100% kind of guys.
Great. Let's take 2 more questions.
Well, I could tell the part that was 10% bull because Mel Gibson was running around standing up the whole movie going, yeah, you know. And I'm going, oh my God, this guy's going to get blown away, but he never got wounded or nothing, hardly. So. And the first sergeant, but great movie.
Okay, we have Bill right over here.
Bill Sullivan, I have a question for the panel. And I understand that the military serves at the direction of the president, and you have to follow orders, and it goes right down the chain of command. I want to know if you ever felt the frustration of the grunt being handcuffed with free fire zones, no fire zones. You can't pursue the enemy certain places. You have to wait for them to come to you. Sometimes you can't make contact until you're shot at. And after Tet, I felt that it was a military victory. And I used to joke with the squad, if you added up all the body counts that had been sent in, we'd have killed North Vietnamese population 3 times over. We got away from that. And everything was a victory, General. You're right. They claimed it was a victory. It wasn't always the truth. And what I want, like I said, what I wanted to know is, could you feel it, the military changing, the attitude changing when Walter Cronkite walked the streets of Vietnam and said the war can't be won? I just know that it sort of took the wind out of us. We felt it was a military victory. We felt we did well. And personally, I feel if the sergeants had been in charge and not the president, it would have been a different outcome completely. my personal opinion. But did you feel that frustration?
I'll give it a go. You know, I read a great book. It was a 2-volume history of the life of John J. Pershing. And it talks about how the U.S. Army was sent into Mexico and then had their hands tied. You know what I mean? It said, don't attack them, don't do this, don't do that. And so they chased Pancho Villa around for a while, and it was sort of a hopeless kind of thing, you know. And then they finally withdrew and came back in the United States. And that what we call the Mexican expedition or whatever was sort of a joke. And I remember that because that was about rules of engagement, okay? And then when I was in Berlin, serving in Berlin, you talk about rules of engagement, you know what I mean? When people were trying to escape out of East Berlin and we were told, you know, don't help them, don't get involved. A lady came to me one time when I was over in East Berlin on duty. You get sent on duty over there in your uniform, riding in a sedan, and going to the Russian PX, and didn't have anything there anyway. There was all the Russians were in our PX, but they didn't have anything to sell except Czechoslovakian crystal, which I dropped on my way out. Anyway, the same was true there, where they tied our hands so bad that, you know, we were actually acting like we were afraid of East Germans. You know, we weren't afraid of East Germans, but you couldn't move at them, you know. And then nobody wanted to start a war there. And so there was that kind of intimidation by higher headquarters. In Vietnam, during a period of time that you're talking about at Tet, we always felt like we had been very successful in Tet. And I started out down in Tonson Newton, in the dam Tonson Newton. I heard AK-47s firing, and I was just coming off R&R. I didn't even have a weapon. All I wanted to do was get the hell out of there back to Like K. But from my thought after that, everybody was fighting like hell, you know. The 25th Colonel then, Glenn Otis, was commanding the Cav, the 3/4 Cav over in the 25th, and they went charging in there and kicked the butts. And the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment was up in Cambodia, north of the Big Red One, and they got orders. I'll never forget it, because Red Fuller, who was the G3 of 2 Field Forces and had commanded the 25th, said to me on the radio, get a hold of Black Horse and tell them to move to Benoit immediately. They were on the Cambodian border up there. And those guys hightailed it, you know, the tanks and trucks and everything coming down Thunder Road going south into Benoit. They left anything broke down, they just left it on the side of the road. Some of you are shaking your head, so maybe you saw them going by. But that was a great day. They went down there to Benoit and just cleaned house on the VC that had taken over parts of Benoit Air Base. So from what I could see, you know, we were in pretty good shape at Tet. The problem was in the United States and the way the United States people felt about what was going on there, because they weren't getting what I would consider to be the straight story. You know, we didn't try to tell it enough well from our side. We thought we did pretty good. That was my impression. So I hope that fits in with yours, Horst, because you know, I know you're a good soldier, and but that's what happened. And we, you know, the Tet offensive, from a standpoint of the enemy, was a great happening for the enemy, in spite of the fact that we killed more than they killed. That's my answer. Right.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to throw the flag. I know that we could spend all day listening to these 3 terrific speakers and veterans. I've learned many things in listening to the three of you, but two are going to stick with me. The first is that the donut dollies also didn't know where the heck they were most of the time. So I can cross them off my list of possible suspects who did know. But the second thing is, when you look at how powerfully all of you felt about the names we read today, and when you see how powerfully the sacrifice that these people witnessed affects them to this day, the message for me, and I'll remember this when I have to give Memorial Day talks in a couple of weeks, and that is the only thing we can do is hope to be good enough that we are worthy of that sacrifice. And I hope we are, and I believe that we are. So thank you very, very much. Okay, now I hope everybody will bear with, just sit down a second, I got a couple of admin things as I always do. I hope everybody will bear with us for just a second. These three distinguished authors are going to sign books out in the lobby. So we're going to give them, I know everybody wants to go up and ask them questions, so you can't do that. We got to move them out. So JD is going to take charge of them, or Keith will, and we'll move that. We'll ask Joanne and Jim